You're watching Stat News Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. It's great to see from Washington, D.C. Dr. Kamran Bukhari is the Director, Analytical Development with the Center of Global Policy. Dr. Bukhari, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Amitabh.
Dr. Bukhari, just wanted to talk about the American call for a resolution at the United Nations Security Council to extend the arms embargo against Iran this week. Now, knowing that Russia and China, of course, veto-wielding powers are against that, it's very unlikely to go through. But the whole Iran issue is quite a mess.
It is, but I would say that the Trump administration isn't in any hurry on this because what the Iranians need is, overall sanctions relief. Weapons are not their immediate concern. They're not going to war right away. They're not in the middle of one. They have a domestic, if you will, industry to produce weapons. So it's not like they're hurting. And I think that this is one of many tools at the disposal of the United States. And we need to see a lot of these announcements and moves on the part of Washington as part of sort of the election cycle. We're headed to elections, and President Trump needs to maximize his vote base. He's come under fire on a number of fronts, and his numbers are sagging. So we can't separate the two.
Even if you can't separate the two, and you're saying there's no hurry, but October 18th, I think, is when the lapse happens for the embargo. So I presume by September 18th, something will have to be in place if it's to move forward or any kind of movement on that. But how do you see, say, the GCC and their endorsement of the extension of the arms embargo, especially when it's a unanimous endorsement. They've sent a letter to the United Nations Security Council. Qatar is part of it. And despite those frictions and fissures that have divided the GCC, do you see that also? Do they recognize that this is an election cycle, or how do you see it?
Well, obviously they have to support that because in the long run, if that embargo is relaxed, then they are the first ones to be, come under threat, if you will. So it's a natural course of action from them. And there are certain things about, the expiration of certain provisions. And this is sort of the normal buildup ahead of sort of the deadline for expiration. So I don't think it's extraordinary. I think it's a desire on the part of the United States to maintain that policy of maximum pressure, and on the part of the GCC countries to make sure that Iran is contained.
But do you see the U.S. or the Trump administration actually playing a dirty game? Because, they've withdrawn from the JCPO, but they're trying to invoke the United Nations and being still part of the sanctions there, and possibly trigger what's called a snapback if the resolution doesn't go through, as it most likely won't.
Yeah, the United States can always do unilaterally impose stuff and then, of course, use its influence around the world to ensure that other nations comply to the extent that they can leverage that. This is part of sort of the normal course of action when you cannot get a unanimous vote in the UNSC. But again, I think that it's from the Trump administration's point of view, this is, again, one of many tools to basically deal with Iran.
And when you're talking about one of many tools, if you look at American policy as an overall, and especially what's happening right now and its aggressive policies on various fronts, dimensions against China, how do you see China in the region? Maybe a month or a month and a half back, there was reports that were leaked about the strategic deal, which was initiated, of course, in 2016 when Xi Jinping went to Tehran. But the timing of that, the two countries that the Americans were opposing or trying to isolate at least, did you see anything in that report, Iran and China coming together in the area for 25-year-old $400 billion strategic partnership?
So that was interesting on two fronts. So there's the short-term aspect to it, and then there's the long-term aspect. The short-term aspect is that the Chinese and the Americans are, wrestling with each other on multiple fronts. So the Chinese are, basically signaling and saying, hey, we can cause you problems in other areas if you won't do business with us in these other areas. So there's that value of why now? Why just in the past month or so that we're learning of this expected deal? So that's number one. Now, having said that, it is indeed part of the Chinese efforts to expand its BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and push into the Eurasian landmass. A colleague of mine at the Johns Hopkins University here, whom I did a webinar with recently, Daniel Markey, has a fascinating book out on China pushing into Eurasia, and one of his case studies is Iran. So he provides for a compelling argument that, look, the Iranians are not just playing hardball geopolitics for the short term. They do intend to do that. Now, the question is when, how, and how long will that take? We see them doing that in Pakistan. They're pushing into Kazakhstan. And of course, this is sort of, the westward push of the Chinese. So that's more long term.
But when you look at the Chinese traditional diplomacy relations in that area, it's been with the countries that are opposed to Iran, whether it's GCC, whether it's Saudi Arabia. So how do they balance that? What game are they really playing there?
Well, I mean, like, any great power getting involved in another region, the Chinese have to do that balancing act. I mean, that is the problem of the United States, right? And when the Obama administration did the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, it was seen as a betrayal by the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Khalijis. So, but in the end, there has to be some form of normalization or new normal, if you will, with Iran that doesn't work as a zero-sum game vis-a-vis the Gulf Arab states. I think the Chinese will do the same thing. They will have to see, and they'll have to work out a way. But for them, that's too long term. I mean, they'll cross that bridge when they get there. Right now, there is value in just saying, look, we're going into Iran. It gives them a lot of mileage at home, overseas, and a lot of leverage with the United States in their negotiations.
And then when we are talking about timing of reports, the reports that again surfaced about the U.S. looking into the Saudi nuclear program and it leading to a bomb and Chinese help there. Now, where do you see all of that fitting into the jigsaw?
That's a great question, Amitabh. So that's a lot of people here in Washington and especially the Wall Street Journal that broke the report basically said, focused on the Saudis, that this is the Saudis trying to acquire nuclear technology, both civilian and potentially weapons technology. I look at it differently. The Saudis are even far behind the Emiratis. The Emiratis actually have a nuclear sector. They have the legal framework and whatnot. The Saudis are just starting down this road. This report was not about the Saudis. I read it as more about the Chinese. The Americans leaked it. This was an American intelligence leak to the Wall Street Journal. Essentially, this is the United States trying to put pressure on the Chinese, basically saying, look, the Chinese are engaged in all sorts of subversive activities. They're dealing with the Iranians. Now they're providing weapons to the Saudis. They're pushing against India in Ladakh. And they're doing this in Hong Kong and the South China Sea and Huawei and 5G and the Uyghurs. So this is a buildup. This is part of the buildup that the United States is doing against the Chinese.
And when you talk about the pressure, and you mentioned Ladakh, South China Sea, various other factors, the Uyghurs, how do you see a recent, maybe 10 days back when there was a virtual video conference that the Chinese Foreign Minister, State Councillor Wang Yi, had with his Nepalese, his Pakistani counterpart, Foreign Minister Qureshi, as well as the Afghan Foreign Minister Hanif Atmar. And you were talking about the BRI. Well, it was ostensibly about COVID, but they were also pushing the BRI, which all those countries have essentially accepted.
Yes, I mean, look, this is the Chinese, stomping ground, for lack of a better term. The Nepal, Afghanistan. Although the border is very small, but Pakistan with CPEC, that's a very large investment, a large political economic footprint in South Asia. So the Chinese have to do these things. These are very logical outcomes of the trend, of the broader trajectory that the Chinese are pushing. From the American point of view, there's two ways to look at it. One is the United States needs stability in South Asia, and if the Chinese are paying for it, great. That's one aspect. The other thing is but you don't want the Chinese to have a disproportionate amount of influence in South Asia in the long run. So there are short-term versus long-term issues that the United States is trying to grapple with.
And how do you see India when it comes to Iran? Now, we've had a traditional relationship with them, which has been hurt by the US sanctions. Like all other countries, oil has gone down to zero, but we got the exemption for Chabahar, but only specific vis-a-vis Afghanistan. There's been a little bit, or at least reports again, whether they're being leaked or not, about friction between India and Iran about the Chabahar Railroad all the way to Afghanistan as well. How do you see India juggling various balls here in that region?
So I think that if I'm an Indian strategist, when I look at Iran and I say, I have time, I'm not in any rush. I don't want to upset the United States, so I'm not in any rush. I don't want to abandon Iran. Iran is my gateway, not just to Afghanistan, but to Central Asia. And so that's a long-term thing. The Indians are never going to give that up, regardless of who's in power in Delhi. But it's one of those things that you brew slowly. You don't. It's not fast food. It's like you take your time and you build it. Especially with the United States has to sort out its relationship with Iran in some shape or fashion, and that's the green light that the Indians are looking for. And when that happens, I expect India to ramp up its relationship with the Iranians.
And talking about Pakistan, and again, Foreign Minister Qureshi's recent statements, it was the India-Pakistan thing there again, Kashmir, the OIC, and poking a finger in the eye, so as to speak, of the Saudis there. How do you see that? Why is that really happening?
Well, I think that Pakistan is caught in a very sort of difficult situation amongst several poles. Let's start with the Qataris. So The Qataris and the Saudis don't get along, but the Pakistanis have to do business with the Qataris because the Taliban are based there. Okay, so that's a critical function that they have to do. So that's one. Then the Saudis are, an old ally, and they can't upset them, which is why they have to tread carefully when they deal with Turkey and when they have to deal with Iran. Iran, I think they can manage better because it's a long-standing thing. Turkey is the new issue, that I think is bedeviling Islamabad. How do you maintain a relationship with Turkey and then not upset the Saudis, who are your traditional partners? And so it's a complicated situation. It's the same thing that Pakistan faces with Pakistan would like to have a far better relationship with the United States, but for now China will do if that's not working out. So it's a difficult choice.
Dr. Kamran Bokhari, thank you so much for your perspective and your time. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And a reminder to our viewers, just get all the latest news and analysis on our website, Strat News Global. You can also follow us on our social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram handles. And just click on that bell icon on YouTube if you want to get reminders for videos like this one that we put up. You're watching Strat News Global. I'm Amit Avredi.